Hello, hello, hello. My name is Quinn. My pronouns are they, them, and welcome to my channel, Lucid Moons. It is a very hot, humid day here where I live in Arizona, and I am sweating trying to create this video. So if you do hear like a little humming in the background, it's probably my fans and my AC on. So please forgive any background noise that may be a little bit distracting. But I'm super, super excited because today I'm gonna be starting my very first and very own tarot tag. So if you've watched my monthly retrospective videos, you will know that I am a big fan of movies. It's one of my favorite forms of media to consume, and I love movies of all kinds. And so I decided to create this tag to explore tarot through movie genres. So basically, I'm going to be showing you one or two decks that are representative of a bunch of different movie genres. And I would love it if anyone out there watching would like to create their own response to this tag and create their own video. Or if you're not the video making type, if you want to leave a comment down below and let me know what you would choose in your collection for each of these movie genres, please feel free to do that. And I am going to tag a few other tarot tubers down below to invite you all to participate, but seriously, no pressure whatsoever to join in, only if it's something you want to do and you feel up for it. Otherwise, feel free to ignore me. So the rules are, there's really no rules. You can choose Oracle decks, tarot decks, Lenormand, whatever you want. You can show more than one deck or just one deck per prompt. I have two decks to show for a couple and one for the majority of them, but feel free to do what you want. Also, there's definitely genres and subgenres out there that I didn't include in this list or other types of movies. So if you think of something that you'd like to add, please feel free to add on. If there's a tag that just doesn't work for you or you don't have a deck that fits that category, feel free to take it out. Really, you can do whatever you want to make it your own and make it work for you. The one little stipulation I gave for myself is I chose not to include any specific fandom decks because I thought it would be like a little bit of a cop-out, a little bit on the nose. Like, for example, I have animation as one of the movie categories in here, and I have like a Studio Ghibli themed deck, and I chose not to include that type of deck because it was just like a little bit too easy. But you can totally choose to include fandom decks if you want to. That was just a rule that I made for myself. Like I said, there's really no rules. So I have 13 different prompts that we're gonna go through that represent different movie genres or different styles of movies. So without further ado, let's begin. So the first movie genre that we're going to talk about is one of my favorites, which is sci-fi. Now, this tag is a deck that incorporates imaginative, speculative, and or futuristic concepts. So let's talk a little bit about sci-fi movies to begin with. I think sci-fi, like many genres, has become really subject to certain people, particularly that kind of subscribe to like a far right ideology, who are coming out and saying like, oh, sci-fi movies are all of a sudden woke, and oh, what happened to like good old sci-fi? And basically they're upset that certain sci-fi films or whatever, video games, any form of sci-fi is incorporating, you know, characters from marginalized communities like people of color, LGBTQ. And I just think that's really funny because sci-fi has always been inherently a rebellious form of literature and media. It's always been subversive in nature, and it's always been kind of radical and a way to explore socio-political themes and things like that. Basically, sci-fi is a form of speculative fiction where we are imagining alternative futures to our own, right? Or we're imagining what the future could be like. And for authors or filmmakers who come from marginalized groups, I think that sci-fi is like inherently a radical act of that imagining, and I think it's really cool. So a couple sci-fi movies that I really like and that I really enjoy are The Arrival, amazing movie. I also love Ex Machina and the movie Under the Skin. So those are a few examples of movies that I really like, and I would love to know what your favorite sci-fi movies are down below. Also, I want to mention most of the movies that I'm gonna just give examples of today could definitely fit into more than one genre. Like, for sure, it's pretty much impossible to classify works of art in just one way, right? So take it all with a grain of salt. But for decks, I actually have 2 decks to show you that I think embody the energy and the vibes of sci-fi. And the first one is one that I really love. It's Tarot of the Cat People by Karen Kuykendall. And this is just such a fun and imaginative deck. These are what the backs look like. Oops. And it's really like, it feels like a 70s imagining of the future, which I absolutely adore, or a 70s imagining of an alternate world or an alternate universe. And in this world, not only does everyone have amazing fashion, but their lives are intrinsically linked to cats. And so you will see a cat in every single card. And I love this deck because it feels very transportative. Like, I feel like I am actually immersed in this amazing world. I love the rich colors, and I love the amount of diversity that's shown in these characters. I think that for a deck that came out, you know, in the 80s, in the early 80s, that it really was beyond its time in terms of how inclusive it is. And for that reason, I think it fits really well into the sci-fi genre. I just absolutely love it. It's definitely like a world that is similar to our own, but also has some differences, and you can tell it is a little bit fantastical, a little bit futuristic, but make it 70s, and I absolutely love it. So that is Tarot of the Cat People. The next sci-fi deck that I'm going to showcase today is the Tarot of the Silicon Dawn by Egypt Ernosh. This, unfortunately, is out of print. I believe it was first published back in 2011. And to me, this is just such a perfect sci-fi deck. So first and foremost, Egypt Ernosh was, or is, a transgender woman, and she is a comic book style illustrator. And this deck is sci-fi, not only in the images that we see, like, yes, there's definitely, you see computers, you see futuristic machines, mechanical creatures, things like that. But it's very sci-fi in the sense that it expands and even challenges the traditional boundaries of the tarot. So there's actually 97 cards in this deck. There's duplicate cards, nudity warning. There's duplicate cards for a lot of the major arcana. There's extra cards that you'll see in each suit. Like, this is, for example, the 99 of Cups. And there's also an entirely extra suit in here. I think it's called the Void suit. And some of the cards have, that's not one of them. They have like this gloss, this clear gloss on the finishing. Let's see if I can find one in here somewhere that you can only see in certain, that's not one, that you can only see in certain lighting or from certain angles. Of course I can't find one. Oh, here's one that kind of has it. I don't know if you can kind of see. Let me see if I can find a better one in here somewhere. But, oh, here you can see there's like a wheel in the background of this card that you can only see from a certain angle. So there's like, you know, even more to the story than what meets the eye. And a lot of these characters are very androgynous. It feels like a very outwardly queer deck. It's kind of, you know, sexual and erotic in some ways. There's definitely some like kinky stuff depicted in this deck. And I just think it's overall such a beautiful and amazing sci-fi imagination of the future from a queer trans perspective. So that is the Tarot of the Silicon Dawn. So the next movie genre is probably my favorite ever, and that is horror. So the prompt is a deck that scares, frightens, or disturbs you. And I want to talk a little bit about the horror genre as a whole. And the really cool thing about horror movies or the horror genre is that it reflects the deeply rooted and sometimes subconscious fears that we collectively share as a society in any given time in history. So if we look back at the horror movies that came out at different times throughout history, it'll tell us a lot about what as a society was othered, what was feared, and kind of collectively, subconsciously, what were things that people were truly afraid of. So if you look all the way back to the early 1900s at movies like Dracula, that was a time where there was a lot of immigration, and immigrants were coming from a lot of different countries, but particularly Eastern Europe. And there was sort of this idea that they carried disease and were dirty, and so that's why Dracula was depicted having rats. I think vampires, we can all agree, are almost always a metaphor for SA, and so maybe that's reflected on how, our society saw immigrants as potentially dangerous or violent. You could look at the sci-fi horror of the 50s, and that's related to the current events going on, like the space race, the first a visit to the moon, and also it can be connected to a fear of like the other, that was the Red Scare and communism, and that communists were going to take over everything, and that's really reflected in movies from that time. Also, you can look at the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the 70s. This was a time when a lot of big corporations started to take over the agriculture businesses and farmers, and a lot of people were also moving from rural communities into the cities. There was like this mass exodus and this urbanization happening, and a lot of these people in rural places were left without jobs, without income. They experienced poverty, and so there was sort of this otherness towards these people who were living with a lot of poverty in their lives. There's also this clash of ideas. There was a lot of progressive ideas happening, like the hippie movement and things like that were in conflict to some of the traditional ways that we might associate with some people living in these rural communities. So this movie was really reflective of our fear of sort of hillbillies or poor people, however you want to look at it. And the last example I'll give, because there's many, is in the very early 2000s, after 9/11 and the war in Iraq, and we were seeing horrific images of people jumping out of buildings. We were seeing torture happening in Guantanamo Bay and things like that. We were faced, with a lot of really horrific images, and you can see a huge popularity of gore and gore porn, as they call it, with movies like Saw and things like that kind of reflects our fears and our simultaneous fascination with some of those things that we were seeing. There's also movies like Pulse or The Ring, which came from Japan, and they kind of show a fear of the digitization of things, a fear of new technologies emerging and what dangers they could bring. So I think horror is super fascinating. My partner is a horror connoisseur, and so they have educated me a lot about horror movies, and they've showed me all the quintessential horror movies that I had never seen before. Even though I was already a fan, I'm an even bigger fan now. Some of my personal favorite horror movies, I have a lot, it's hard to choose, but I love psychological horror. I love movies like Hereditary or Midsommar. I also love ghost-ish movies or monster movies. I love The Babadook. I thought that was a really great indie horror film. And I also really, really love Candyman. That's a great 90s horror example. Sorry about that. There was this car swerving loudly in the road outside my house. So I'm going to show you a deck that I think represents horror because it is very creepy and weird and disturbing to me. And that is the Tarot Oscuro by, I think it's Estelle Riviere. It has these really cool dark chrome edges. This deck is so cool. It has a lot of imagery that's very confronting and very disturbing to look at. and it's done purposefully. So basically online it's described as playful, sexual, and monstrous, which all of those things I think are great ways to describe horror as a genre. And it's meant to reflect our subconscious minds and kind of confront us with the darker parts of our own psyche. So yeah, you can clearly see, I know this deck isn't for everyone. It definitely has images that might cause a lot of discomfort or might make you feel weird or grossed out. I personally absolutely love it, as a true horror fan would, because I've never seen anything like this. This is actually a mass market deck. I had never even heard of it until I saw it on Andy's channel, from Andy and Arcadia. And I was like, oh my God, yes, I need this deck. It's just so cool. It's very has a lot of kink and fetish illusions in here as well, and I think it's just a really, really fun and simultaneously scary and disturbing deck. I absolutely love this, cyber goth girl. So that is Tarot Oscuro. The next genre for number 3 is romance. So this is a deck that focuses on relationships with an overall emotionally satisfying or optimistic tone. So I'm gonna be honest, romance is not usually my favorite genre. I think it can be done well in certain instances, but overall it's usually not really my first choice. Romance movies usually focus on passion, emotions, and affections, usually between two people, and let's be real, usually between two heterosexual, cisgender, monogamous folks, right? And so in that way, I think romance movies, not always, but in most cases, they tend to uphold our societal ideals of the perfect relationship, and they tend to normalize certain gender roles within a relationship, certain types of relationships, things like that. So I do have a couple romance movies that I do like, and they're both gay. So one of them is Brokeback Mountain, which is definitely a more serious, almost more like a drama romance, but it was one of the few romantic movies I could think of that I actually liked. And also the movie But I'm a Cheerleader, which is definitely more of like a comedy romance, but also a really, really cute romantic movie. So in terms of a deck to show romance, I decided to show a deck that showed romance and relationships in a little bit of a different light, in my opinion. So I went with the Sasuraibito Tarot by Stasia Burrington, or Stasia, not exactly sure how they pronounce their name. But I think this deck is, look at these gorgeous backs. I think this deck is just absolutely a stunning deck that shows a lot of different types of people who maybe are engaging in lots of different types of relationships. So it's not your typical romance between a man and a woman. I've used this deck to read for other people. I don't read for other people a lot, but I have used this deck for others for romance readings as well as readings about friendships. And I'm that type of person where I do think that in our society, we put romantic relationships above everything, which does make sense, but other relationships like platonic relationships, familial relationships are very, very important as well. And I think this deck just really speaks to that idea and explores sort of all of these different relationships that we have with ourselves and the other peoples in our life. And yeah, there's just a beautiful diversity of characters in here. And I think overall it can be serious because I think romance, you know, usually there is some kind of conflict to overcome in a romance movie. But overall it does have this very sweet and heartfelt and uplifting tone to it. So this is my pick for the romance genre. It's a little bit of a different take on romance, and this is the Sasuraibito Tarot. So the next genre and the next prompt is a thriller. And I love thriller movies. So this is a deck that delivers tension, surprise, and or a sense of impending doom and keeps you at the edge of your seat. So thriller is one of those really interesting genres where I feel like it overlaps with a lot of other genres. It often has elements of horror, elements of mystery, romance, etc., right? So it can be a little bit tricky to pinpoint an exact thriller movie, but I definitely think that thrillers are characterized kind of by the psychological response that they elicit. They make us feel a broad range of emotions like fear, anxiety, stress, tension, etc. So to me, thrillers are usually very psychologically stimulating. And a few examples of real life thriller movies that I love are The Watcher. Oh my gosh, if you haven't seen that movie, it's so good. I absolutely love it. It had me on the edge of my seat the entire time. A classic example is Misery. I will forever love that movie. And another great animated example is Perfect Blue. And I highly recommend checking out that movie. It's a Japanese animation movie. And actually, the creator who made Black Swan kind of, dare I say, like stole a lot of scenes and inspiration for that movie. I guess you could say maybe stealing is a strong word, but I do know that he didn't necessarily give credit where credit was due in terms of that movie. So if you like Black Swan, you definitely got to check out the original where all that inspiration came from because it's phenomenal. It's a great movie. So I chose the Somnia Tarot for my thriller pick. This is one of my favorite decks. It's absolutely stunning. This is by Nicholas Bruno. He did an absolutely wonderful job on this deck. Now, this is thriller to me because it definitely elicits that sense of impending doom. It feels very suspenseful. It feels disturbing. It's psychologically stimulating. It's very much based on the RWS, but Nicholas Bruno did an incredible job of putting his own spin on the traditional meanings and showcasing them in a way that really makes you think. It really makes you question what you know about the cards and the meanings. And it really kind of can take you to some dark places, in my opinion. And when I'm working with this deck, I really do feel that suspense. Like I'm at the edge of my seat, like what card is going to come out next? What message is it going to have for me? And it's just a really exciting and invigorating experience. So I think this is the absolutely perfect thriller. It does have elements of horror, but I think it's the absolutely perfect thriller deck. So that is the Somnia Tarot. Prompt number 5 is mystery. So this is a deck that is mysterious, suspenseful, and doesn't reveal answers right away. Working with this deck may feel like solving a puzzle. So I love the mystery genre. I tend to prefer to read mystery rather than watch it, but there are a couple mystery movies that I really like. Knives Out is like a really funny kind of like comedy mystery that's definitely like a whodunit classic vibe. Really fun. Silence of the Lambs definitely could be seen as a thriller or even a horror too, but it's kind of like trying to figure out who was the one that committed these crimes, right? And then another really good one that's a mystery thriller is The Woman in the Window. So those are some of my favorites. Feel free as you go through this video to let me know what some of your favorites in each of these genres are below in the comment section. But basically, the cool thing about mysteries is that the viewer is involved in piecing together information and clues and putting all of these puzzle pieces together. There's definitely elements of deception, and it focuses on the pursuit of truth, which is something that is very universal and related. We can all relate to. So this was a tricky one for me, but I decided to choose the elements of the Source Oracle. Now, this is an oracle you probably haven't seen very much of, and the reason why is that this is a deck that is related to the interactive art exhibit Meow Wolf. So for those of you who don't know, Meow Wolf is kind of like an interactive museum, but it's more like an experience than an actual just going to view art. Like you actually interact with the art around you. You open little doors, you crawl through all of these different spaces. And it was started by this collective of artists, and there's also locations in Denver and Las Vegas. I've only been to the Santa Fe location, which is called the House of Eternal Return, so I can't speak to the other locations, but I've been to the Santa Fe one multiple times and I absolutely love it. And there's this whole storyline involved with the House of Eternal Return that you are slowly piecing together as you make your way through the interactive art exhibit, right? So everything around you is a clue. There's papers and journal entries and notes and magazines and books, and it's all been created to basically be clues to this story. Essentially, this is a story in which a family disappears. They go missing after they've been messing around with interdimensional travel because they were trying to bring back their deceased loved ones. And there's also like new age, kind of like weird culty elements in this storyline. You can totally go to this exhibit and just enjoy the cool things and just play around, or you can try to help solve the mystery and piece together the story. So I love that it's kind of like a choose your own adventure. And this is the Oracle deck that Meow Wolf has created. So I chose this because it's yet another piece of the puzzle. It's another piece of the mystery. I believe you can purchase this deck online, but I got mine directly from Meow Wolf in Santa Fe while I was visiting, and it's definitely a dark deck. Like, check this out. It has a lot of really confronting imagery, and it's definitely mysterious. It has its own internal system. So you'll see at the top, there's different suits, so to speak. And there's a lot of information on these cards. So it's definitely not a deck that you're necessarily gonna pick up and get a super easy message. There's definitely a lot more to explore under the surface here. This deck definitely has sci-fi and horror elements to it as well. But I thought that the way that it fits into the Meow Wolf narrative is just really cool and makes it the perfect example of a deck for the mystery genre. So that's my choice for mystery, and that's Elements of the Source Oracle. Prompt number 6 is your good old action movie. So this is a deck that features loud, wild, and spectacular imagery that may be overwhelming, but you love it anyways. So that probably tells you a little bit about how I feel about action movies. Generally not the biggest fan. I think, once again, they can be done well, but overall, they're not usually my thing. So action movies, they usually follow a protagonist who is facing a variety of challenges, and he's battling different opponents in the pursuit of some sort of goal or some sort of freedom, right? So it's definitely movies that tend to be a lot about like individualism and exerting your power in the world, right? Often there's a lot of violence. There might be explosions, chase scenes, weapons, or crazy stunts going on. So for me, in your typical action movie, there's just like so much going on that I feel really overwhelmed, and I actually often will fall asleep during those movies, which I think is really funny just because, yeah, I get too overwhelmed. And really, action movies are about like the spectacle, right? There's just this crazy, intense, chaotic things happening, and it's a spectacle that entertains us, right? So a couple examples of action movies that I like, and you'll see I tend to kind of like more like sci-fi action, but I love Terminator 2, I love The Matrix, and of course John Wick is another really great example of action movies. So my choice for action is the Tarot del Fuego, if I'm going to say it in my correct accent. So here's the backs. I've trimmed my copy down to be a little extra mini because it was already a tiny little deck, and I made it even tinier, so it's like the perfect size. And this deck is just, yeah, you can see there's so much going on in all of these cards. There's fire everywhere. There's blood. It feels very chaotic. It feels very like a spectacle to just take in. I think that this deck is actually really cool, and even though it does, at first glance, it seems really overwhelming, I actually like how like maximal it is because there's so much to look at in every single card, and it definitely goes its own way in terms of depicting the tarot meanings, but I actually find it to be a really intuitive and direct tarot reader. Like, it's both an intuitive reader and a sharpshooter for me. But yeah, this just feels like an action movie. There's a lot of action happening. So this is my pick for action, and this is Tarot del Fuego. The next prompt is fantasy. So this is a deck that transports you to an imaginary world with magic, mystical creatures, and or elements of the supernatural that don't necessarily exist in the real world. Okay, so fantasy is also an awesome genre. It's kind of a way for us as the readers or the viewers to escape, right? It serves as this escape into an alternative universe, an alternative world that has whimsical elements, magical elements, and laws that are different than our own. So it kind of has elements from our own world, but it's also its own world with its own rules. Some films that I love in the fantasy genre are The Dark Crystal. I love Pan's Labyrinth, which is definitely like a horror fantasy movie. Oh, that's such an amazing movie. And then I love some of the Studio Ghibli movies. Like, you guys have probably heard me rave about these movies, but movies like Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away are amazing examples of animated fantasy movies. So if you haven't seen those, please stop what you're doing, pause this video, go rent it right now and watch it. So I chose the For Hoxa Tarot. I had a lot of decks in my collection that could potentially work for fantasy, but I chose this one because it's one I haven't showcased a lot on my channel so far. And this is by MJ Cullinane. This is the indie version. Now there's a mass market version available, but I chose this because not only does it include magical creatures, like mostly fairies, but there's also dragons, mermaids, etc., etc. It just feels magical. It feels like it exists in this other world where there's magic everywhere. And I feel like it's a very transportative deck where when I'm using it, I feel really immersed in this world. So it is almost like an escape for me, an escape into somewhere where nature is everywhere and all of these beings are living in harmony with nature and magic is real. There is good fighting against evil. A lot of those, very typical themes that you might see in a fantasy movie. I think that the artwork is absolutely stunning in this deck. It took me a little while. Some of the faces are a little uncanny valley. I've definitely mentioned that before. It took me a little while to accept it and get into it, but I actually really quite love it now. And it's one of my faves. And I especially love working with like fairies and mermaids and fae energy. So that is my choice for fantasy. And that is the For Hoxa, the Enchanting For Hoxa, I believe, tarot. Alrighty. The next genre is comedy. Classic, right? So this is a deck that is humorous, amusing, or induces laughter and or a sense of enjoyment. I love comedy. I'm kind of have the sense of humor of like an adolescent boy. So I really love stupid, slapstick, like fart joke humor. I also really love kind of like quirky, ironic humor, things like that. So a few of my favorite comedies, to throw a little bit of a classic at you, I absolutely love Young Frankenstein. The movie cracks me up the entire way through and I never get tired of watching it. I love The Step Brothers. It has not aged well. Trust me, if you haven't watched it in a while or if you've never seen it, keep it in mind. the era it comes from. Okay, it comes from. It has a lot of offensive jokes in there, but if you can look past that, there just is a lot of really funny shit in there. Like, what can I say? I love Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly as comedians. They just, that type of humor just really makes me chuckle. I could probably recite most of that movie because I've seen it so many times. And I also love Napoleon Dynamite. That's another like little bit of a throwback for you, but it's just kind of this very silly, kind of quirky form of comedy where it's, the characters are kind of relatable in a way, but they're so quirky and weird, and you just almost are laughing because it's so awkward and bizarre. I don't really know how to describe it, but I do really like that type of comedy as well. So comedy is like, you know, one of the oldest forms of entertainment, right? If you think back to the good old like tragedy versus comedy, right? Like trying to make other people laugh through entertainment is really, it goes way back. And I think comedy is a way for us to examine the human condition and even just to poke fun at different people or different situations or things like that. I'm a big fan of comedy. So I decided to go with the Tarot by Naoshi for my comedy deck because this deck definitely does elicit laughter and just a sense of pure enjoyment for me. This is a majors only deck, and this creator is originally from Japan, and I believe they're based out of Los Angeles. But if you look at these cards and the little characters in the background, they are just so cute and so funny. You'll see some of the same characters reoccurring throughout the deck. And like, for example, this little octopus and this little shrimp guy who's holding up the barber, and she's like giving an octopus a haircut, I guess, for the strength card. We have a panda and a monkey eating ramen in the back of the temperance, and like a little fish guy meditating. Here's the little shrimp. We have like a little skeleton cat with a fool. It's just so funny. We have all our little food characters here in the Empress. Here's our squid and our octopus and a little fish booty. And a little snake coming out of the trumpet. It's just so funny. Look at this one with the little rabbits holding each other by the ears as they're on the trapeze, and all these little characters. So for me, this deck just makes me laugh. It brings me a lot of joy. I think it's amazing. I don't know if I mentioned this. I might have already said this, but this creator makes all of their art using sand. So that's pretty incredible to me. Check out the star. This little star guy is getting dumped on by the water from the water bearer. I think that this is just a really cute deck. It incorporates, it's obviously just a traditional RWS, Major Arcana deck, but it has all of these little funny characters, and to me, it's like almost like it's poking fun at the seriousness of traditional tarot. That's how I see it. I don't know if that's how it was intended, but I think that that's important sometimes for us to see the joy, the lightness, the humor in the thing that we love so much. And I'm sure many of you can agree that a lot of us can be really serious about tarot. For a lot of us, it's like our special interest, right? Or something we're really passionate about. So sometimes it's good to laugh at ourselves and laugh at the things that we take very seriously or that we care a lot about. So that is my choice for comedy, and that is the Tarot by Naoshi. So the next genre or the next prompt is drama. So this is a deck that focuses on a conflict between characters or with a character or in a character's life that may have a little bit more of a serious tone, okay? So drama is one of those genres that can be a little bit tricky to define because technically every narrative story that has a conflict is a drama, but I think overall when we think of drama, we're often thinking of more realistic portrayals of stories or characters that are imparting certain messages or morals onto the audience. And yeah, some of my favorite drama movies, which I have a lot, are movies like Shoplifters, Moonlight, Tokyo Godfathers, and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is kind of like a more serious romance movie as well, you could say. So for my drama deck, I ended up choosing the Loputin Oracle, and this is an absolutely gorgeous oracle deck in my collection. It's not realistic, so it doesn't really fit that part of the prompt, but it is kind of like a romantic deck, or to me, it's a deck that tells the story of a romance, but it has a very serious tone to it. And this is how I personally interpret the art of this deck. I see this as a young woman, or you could just think of it as just a young person who is in a relationship with this wolf character. Now, you could read the wolf character as like maybe an older man or an older partner. You could also see it as someone who is maybe a little bit toxic, a little bit manipulative. That's at least how I see it. And it's kind of the story of this girl as she's navigating this relationship. There's a lot of like sex in this deck as well, just FYI. She's navigating this relationship. She's coming into her own. She's coming into her sexuality. And she's basically figuring out who she is and how, you know, to be empowered, right? Because in a lot of these cards, to me, she's clearly depicted as like a victim or someone who's very passive. And for that reason, I think this deck, the images in this deck can actually be pretty triggering. But I don't know, that's what I see when I look at this deck. So it's really cool that I can see this whole story just by looking at these cards. And I think that that is really, you know, what drama is. It's kind of like this serious story about this young woman and her lover. So that is the absolutely gorgeous Loputin Oracle. The next prompt is a documentary, and this is another one of my favorite genres of film. So this is a deck that depicts real life people, animals, or events that may be educational or informative. Now, I love documentaries. There's a ton of really great ones on Netflix, but they're a unique way that we can explore or try to understand the different complexities in our world. And they often shed light on social, political, and cultural issues that may otherwise go unnoticed, or they might be things that we would never ever hear about. Now, I have way too many documentaries to list that I love, but I'll name a few that I do really like. Prophet's Prey is a really good one about the fundamentalist Mormon cult. There's also My Octopus Teacher, which is just an absolutely beautiful, heartfelt nature documentary about a man who had a friendship, I guess, with an octopus, and it tells the story of her life. It's a real tearjerker, but it's absolutely amazing, and it really is like an exploration of relationships between human and animals, and it really makes you see the amount of emotions, feelings, personalities that animals can have. And intelligence, of course. And then another really cool older documentary, I think from the 90s, maybe early 2000s, is Baraka. And so that's like it's a documentary with no dialogue, and it just shows nature and culture from around the world with really great music. So that's a really cool one as well. So for my documentary pick, I decided to go with this beautiful deck, which is the Nocturna Oracle by Megan Wire-Wheaton. So I went with nature documentary because I do love me a good nature documentary, but sometimes they are hard for me to watch because they can be really sad. If there's like animals killing each other because nature is fucking brutal, or a lot of them are, you know, rightfully showing things as a result of climate change and like sounding the alarm, which is, I think, is so important, but it's also just like very difficult to see sometimes. But this deck actually reminds me of a specific nature documentary on Netflix. I believe it was a Planet Earth one, and it was all about animals at night. And so they use like really advanced film technology to film animals doing their thing in the middle of the night, which was really cool. They actually learned new information from this. Like, I guess in the past, they didn't think cheetahs hunted at night, but turns out they do, which makes sense. I love this deck because it has such a peaceful vibe to it. It feels very quiet, very magical, like venturing out into the forest at night. There's animals, there's botanicals, there's like crystals in here. And it just feels like a really realistic depiction of nature. And it has just like such a calming effect on me when I work with this deck. The guidebook, I freaking hate when Oracle decks do this. So it's not in alphabetical order or anything like that, and it's not numbered. At least there's an index, because sometimes decks don't even give you that, and it's like, what were you thinking? So it still pisses me off when I'm trying to find the meanings, because it takes a little bit. But it does give you, it doesn't give you a lot, but it just gives you a little blip about each animal or each thing, and so it does feel informative and educational in that way as well. So I really, despite the guidebook, I wish they would fix it, but despite the guidebook, I really, really love this deck, and it has gorgeous linen cardstock. This is one of my favorite cards. So that is the Nocturna Oracle, and that is my pick for a documentary film. The next prompt is an animated film. So technically, animation is not a genre, okay? We're cheating a little bit here. Animation is a medium for artistic expression or storytelling. And so obviously animated movies can be a million genres, okay? But I still think that they are a very valid and fun category of movies. So that's why I decided to include it in this tag. So some of my favorite animated movies are, of course, Shrek. Gotta represent forever, Shrek. I love Box Trolls. So Shrek is like CGI animation, very old, early 2000s CGI animation. Box Trolls is a Leica movie, and that is stop motion, which is one of my favorite forms of animation. A dying art for sure, but Leica is still out there doing the good work. So if you've never seen any of their movies, they're the ones that made Coraline. I feel like that's probably the most well-known one. But definitely go check out some of the Leica movies. The Box Trolls surprisingly was my favorite one that I've seen so far. And then I love, of course, I've mentioned a million times, you know what I'm gonna say, I love Studio Ghibli, in particular Hayao Miyazaki's films. I love all of his movies that I've seen. The one I'll mention here, it's not necessarily my favorite in terms of the characters or the story, but it is my favorite in terms of the quality and just the amazing animation. And that is The Boy and the Heron, which is his newest film that I believe came out last year, I think. So those are a few great animated movies. So I don't know if I said the prompt yet. I don't think I did. So the prompt is a deck with bright, expressive, or cartoon-like images that you probably would have loved as a kid and that you still love as an adult, because I love animation as an adult. It's one of my favorite mediums. So I decided to go with this one. I have a lot of really cute decks that kind of give off that like cartoony vibe, but I decided to go with the Tarot of the Divine by Yoshi Yoshitani. Mine's edged in a teal blue, and this deck kind of gives me like Disney, dare I say Disney or Disney Pixar vibes, just in the way that these characters are rendered. This really feels like it could be like a Pixar movie or something like that. The faces are just so expressive. They show so much emotion. I think Yoshi Yoshitani is an incredibly talented artist, and I absolutely love their work. I follow them on Instagram, and I like every damn thing that they post. I've talked about before how I struggle to use this deck, but I hang on to it because I just am enamored with this beautiful artwork. This definitely feels like a movie, an animated movie that I would have absolutely loved when I was a kid, and that I would have continued to love into my adult years. And I think that this does such a great job of telling a story, or stories in this case, through art and through drawings. And that's really what animation is, right? So this is my pick for an animated movie, and that is the Tarot of the Divine. The next prompt is number 12, and that is a Western. So, this is a deck that embodies a sense of freedom, exploration, and adventure. So Westerns, definitely not my favorite genre. I had a really hard time picking Western movies that I actually liked or that I've actually seen. But I thought that it would be a fun prompt to add in here. Might be a little bit of a tricky one for some of us. So Westerns often explore themes of justice, freedom, manifest destiny, which is racist, race relations, which are also racist, and individualism, which can definitely be racist. So like if you look at a lot of really old Western movies, they do showcase a lot of racism towards non-white people, particularly Native Americans, especially the really early ones. And yeah, so they can be really problematic, a lot of those movies. However, if I had to choose a couple Westerns that I like, these are kind of a stretch. I like Rango, which is an animated Western that's really cute, and Thelma and Louise, which is kind of Western-y, I guess, in my defense. So it's the most Western I could get. But that's like a really cool kind of queer-coded thriller, Western-y, maybe romancy. I don't know. It's a good movie. Go check it out. So I am going to be super obnoxious and really on the nose for this one, but I'm going to show you the Desert Illuminations Tarot, which is another one of my all-time favorite decks. I've ranted and raved about this deck before many times. I have the indie version, which is currently out of print. You know, they've been saying that a mass market version is coming sometime soon. We've been waiting, I think, for a couple years for it now. Hopefully that's going to drop sometime soon. This is a perfect Western. This is set in the southwestern United States, which, if you don't know, that's my home. I was born and raised in Arizona. I've lived all over the 3 major cities in Arizona. And even though the creator of this deck is from New Mexico and there is a lot of like New Mexico specific references in here, it just feels like home to me. It feels like me. So this deck is filled with cowboys, aliens, Native American culture, Mexican American culture, uniquely Southwestern and New Mexican culture. So I think this is a great retelling of that Western narrative that's much more inclusive, that celebrates different cultures, that the many diverse cultures that we have here in the southwestern United States. The guidebook is great because it talks about a lot of the references, the historical figures and pop culture references in here. And it has freaking aliens. Like, what more could you ask for a southwestern deck? It's just absolutely perfect. And absolutely, it feels like going on an adventure. It feels like that spirit of adventure without the racism. This deck is by Lindsay D. Williams. I don't think I mentioned that. And I think it's absolutely stunning. I love this color palette. This is another one that just sparks so much joy for me. And I'm very eagerly awaiting for it to drop in the mass market so that even more people can have access to this amazing, amazing masterpiece, in my opinion. So this is my pick for Western, and it's the Desert Illuminations Tarot. So the last genre that I decided to throw in here is black and white film. So once again, this is not really a genre, okay? Black and white films are just, you know, for the most part, films that were made before they were capable of creating color films. So they could be any genre, really. But I wanted to throw it in here because I thought it would be fun. And there are a lot of black and white movies that I absolutely love. I love the original Frankenstein movie, which is amazing. I already mentioned Young Frankenstein, of course, which was also done in black and white. The Rear Window by Alfred Hitchcock is a great one in many of Hitchcock's films. Also love the original Night of the Living Dead. That was a fantastic movie. And a modern black and white movie is The Lighthouse. Absolutely love that. Super weird, super homoerotic, everything I could ask for. So the prompt for this one is you have 2 options. It's either your favorite black and white deck or a vintage deck from another era. So I'll let you choose which one you want to do, or maybe you want to show one for each. I decided to go with my favorite black and white deck, and this is the stunning Poesis Oracle by Andrea Wan. Here are the backs. And this deck is an experience. It has this really nice rose petal finish. It feels very luxurious. I really like that it's a black and white deck, but the white isn't a stark white. It's like an off-white color. And this deck just has the best images and amazing keywords. It's one that is very versatile. It pairs very well with many other decks. And if you don't know, there's a poem for each card. You can access them online. I'm thinking about purchasing an actual physical guidebook because I just prefer that. But I just absolutely love the poems written for each card. I think they're phenomenal. I feel like I get a lot out of this deck when I read with it. It can be serious, it can be funny, and it's just absolutely beautiful. So this is my favorite black and white deck, the Poesis Oracle. So that is the last of the 13 prompts for this tag. Thank you so much for watching and joining me. Like I said, if you're watching, I invite you to join in on the fun if you want to and create your own response to this tag. I would love that so much to see what decks you would choose for each of these movie genres. And like I said, feel free to add, take away, do your own thing with it and make it your own. It would mean a lot to me if you could like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. So yeah, that's all I have for you today. I hope that no matter where you are or who you are, the rest of your day is filled with so much magic and so much joy. Bye!